In today's presentation, I want to tell you a little story that happened to me, and I want to tell you a little bit about how I solved that particular problem and the side steps that I did along the way. I'm hoping that you guys can take some of the frameworks to it. It's interesting because I think it maps pretty well to some of the things that we've discussed here today. So with that, so this story starts about a year and a half ago when I was at Turner Broadcasting. I had an awesome job. Loved my job, worked for Rebecca. It was a fabulous place to be. We solved problems for all kinds of interesting people, and I had a really good time. And then, just like you know, what happens whenever you are having a really good time. Somebody walks in and goes, and squishes your ideas. And that guy was the CEO of Turner Broadcasting. His name is John Martin. He instituted Turner 2020, and me and 2,500 of my closest friends walked out in December 2014 out of that building, and I haven't looked back since. But I'm a guy in his 40s. I got a kid, an awesome wife, and a life. All these things cost money, and on top of it all, I was in school. I was in school down at Georgia Tech doing an MBA program. So taking some time off was not really an option. So what I decided to do was go and get another job. So I interviewed maybe 10 times. And when I got down to Oracle, the hiring manager talked to me about the problem that he was looking for. He said, you know, what we really need is somebody to come in and try to tie these 5 different software pieces together. They all came from different vendors. They have the people who actually got bought out are still part of the presentation. They're still part of the organization. And we need to figure out how they all fit together and how we build a UX around that. And I thought to myself, you know, that sounds like an interesting, gnarly problem. And I like hard problems. I want to go do that. So I took the job. But I got in there, and I do what I always do, which is I started to ask a bunch of questions. All UXers, I know you guys are all compulsive question askers, so you probably know how this feels. I asked questions about what's the strategy, and how are we working? How does the software run? What are the metrics that we're working on? How do we measure success? Who came from where? All of these things. And I put it all together in presentations and slide decks, and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. And so, my question is, WTF? What did I do? I know I did the right thing. I know I had the right questions. I knew I had a gut feeling of what the right answers were going to be. Some sort of a direction, at least, right? You know how you sniff out that you have the answer and you're like, it's that way, right? I had all these pieces, but still, I got nothing. And so I'm sitting there and I'm stewing for a little bit, right? It's about February and I'm getting a little like, come on, let's go. But I realized that it was not about that organization. It's about me. What did I do wrong? I forgot, and this is the first time I've done a talk about something that I've screwed up, so this is an interesting opportunity. But I forgot to talk about the empathy of the user. Who's the user of the reports and the information and all the data that you collect? When you are inside of a company and you're not a consultant, it's all your coworkers. And I don't think they really appreciated me talking about how things were broken. So, which gets us to today's presentation. What I did for myself is try to put together a framework for how do I evaluate new job opportunities, and how do I evaluate what kind of questions and how do I need to communicate with the people that are in those companies. And that's what I want to share here with you today. Some of it is geared towards this idea of doing big design thinking and gnarly problems and all that stuff, but I think you guys can all find some useful information on how to extract the pieces and parts. So, why is this important? All you guys are going to switch jobs. It's going to happen. You guys all know this. We're coming into an economy where people are not only staying at jobs shorter of time, they're also becoming permalancers. And I don't mean the people that are freelancing and staying at a company all the time, but they're actually permanently freelancing because it's a viable career. So, which means that you're changing jobs and finding new opportunities and situations all the time. So, with that in mind, let's go through the questions. So, the first thing when you come in, if you're looking for, in this particular aspect, the idea of wanting to do some sort of transformation, and really, design thinking is about transformation, right? This is not a small problem, and it doesn't really matter if you're trying to change culture or trying to change hiring practices, implementing agile, or doing design thinking. It's a big, 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 gnarly problem. And what do you need? You need executive buy-in. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, happens if you don't have it. And so I want to make sure that I point this out to you, because when you walk into these situations, you got to identify who those people are. If you don't have them, if they're not there, if you can't get the support that you need to do the things that you need to do, this effort is dead on arrival. So that's step one. Let's go with the second one. So I want to share with you the change model presented by John Kotter, and I apologize because going to B school basically leads you to put everything together in like one slide ideas, right? We're going to see a quadrant here in a second, and so I apologize up front. But you have to define and understand where the organization that you are in is in the process of implementing that design. Because if you walk in cold, and that's where I was at Oracle, we were here. They didn't think they had a problem, right? And coming in and talking about the problem is not necessarily a good approach. So my point in sharing this with you, and I tweeted out all of these links for you for later so that you can kind of go and get the reading done on your own, is John Kotter put together a framework for how to talk about organizational change. This thing has been validated again and again, and his whole point is this: change management takes years, not months. And you can't skip any of the steps. If you do, you increase your chances of the project failing by approximately 90% per step. So using the research when approaching these type of problems is clearly a good way to go. So with that being said, that's your key point, right? i.e., before the problem is even present inside of the organization, you need to create a sense of urgency. If the sense of urgency is already there, is there a coalition of support? Do these people exist? Who can you link up with? Like, who are those people that are there that can actually help you work on this problem? And up against, right? Like, what's the vision? Where do you want to get to? All of those things are part of solving that problem. So I'm going to let you guys read along on this on your own, but let's go to the next slide. So the third thing that I would like for you guys to think about when you're approaching these organizations, whatever projects it is that you're saying, so yeah, again, here's the quadrant, right? Is what kind of corporation are you in? And the question is there because it relates to what matters to the management. And we're not talking about the people who work there, but the management of that particular organization. This is about how you communicate up. Not just your manager, but his or her manager, and so on up the chain. Because the way that these organizations work, they have an idea about what kind of information they're going for and what they value. And it is expressed in who they are. We had Aaron up here from MailChimp before, right? Do you think that this pretty much describes who they are? Are they an adhocracy? I'm pretty sure they are. I know that from their product. I know from who he is. I can see it from just reading a presentation. Do you think that most consulting companies are clown work? Probably, pretty much so. Now, this all comes from a book called Diagnosing and Changing Organizational Culture by Cameron and Quinn. And again, those tweets are out there so you guys can look it all up. But the point is, if you can start figuring out where is the corporation that you are working with or that you are thinking about working with, you can start figuring out how do I need to communicate up the chain. That's the point of this slide. Next slide, please. So the last part is probably the hardest, right? This quote, I love this quote. Peter Drucker, awesome guy. You can also check out all of his work. It's kept at the Drucker Institute. They keep all of his writings and stuff. He talks about culture eats strategy for breakfast. Everyone here, I'm sure, has heard talks about UX strategy and how impactful it is and all the stuff that it can do for you. But the fact is, that strategy is going to have a hard time surviving a culture that is not receptive to it. So the question then is, what kind of culture exists at the company that you're at? Where does it come from? And how can you fit your communication, and we're talking laterally now, right? My coworkers. How can I fit my communication to the people that are around me in order to make them feel comfortable about these choices? Does all that make sense? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk through how I put it together for Oracle, right? Like after I'd internalized the fact that I'd screwed it all up and communicated with them completely wrong and analyzed them in the wrong way and all that other good stuff. So the first part was, is there a leader? No, there was no leader, okay? I had to wait until, and they all left together, which was convenient, but my manager, his manager, and her manager, 3 levels of management out the door at the same time. That helped. The second part is, where are you in the process? We had not identified what the problem was, so the first thing that I did was we started doing a whole bunch of research and reports that described the problem. No solutions, just problems, right? The last part was identifying that organization. You realize that Oracle is very market-driven, right? These guys are, Larry Ellison has sort of put his stamp on it. It's an incredibly market-driven organization. That was all good. So at least I knew how the upward people wanted to get their information structured. And the last part was, how do I deal with the culture? Well, it turned out that all these guys were coming from corporations that were actually acquired. So the end result was, because they're acquired, they have a sense of entitlement that's associated with the product that they sold, right? Not only were they successful, they were quantifiably successful, right? People paid money for this product. So they thought that the product was really good. Whether it was or not, it's not important. But this identifies for you that you can't go up and tell them, okay, that's broken, that's broken, that's broken, that's broken. Because they're not going to be receptive to that message. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. The question is, how do you reframe that in such a way that they can internalize it and make the choices for how to change all of it? So that's the structure. That's how I now try to evaluate these propositions and bring it up to a little higher level. I hope that you guys found it workable. And thank you. Do you have any questions? Go ahead.
You have to reframe the question or the statement instead of this is broken into something else. How exactly did you reframe that?
Well, so in that case, I used the research approach. Like we have talked a lot about research today, right? Aaron talked about how he structured the data to make it sure that it's available to everyone. She talked about how you make sure that it's available and structured in a way that it's consumable. I put together a whole bunch of reports in order to make sure that I serve up a reason for them to address the problem that's not associated with me and not associated with them, right? So go directly to the customers, record what it is that they're saying. Right? Then it's not about me or you or my wife likes blue and yours likes green. Right? We're in a conversation about facts, not about opinions. Next.
You avoided providing possible solutions.
Avoided providing the possible solutions because of how the culture was set up. They needed to provide the solutions themselves and shoot it down between each other. I had to basically trust that their competitive nature was going to take care of how to fit the solution together. Now, this is not done by any stretch of the imagination, so it's an approach. But yeah, does that make sense? Okay, go ahead. That's a really good question. That's an excellent question. As a matter of fact, I asked myself that the first month. I'm like, why am I here? Right? If you don't want my advice, why am I here? And I think, you know, it turns out that a lot of people make hires to make themselves feel good. Right? They don't necessarily actually understand what it is that they want you to do. And I guess I'm talking to all the students here. This is going to happen to you. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm just going to make sure that it's not me. Okay, next. Anyone else? Well, thank you. I really hope that you found this to be helpful.